The World Beyond the Headlines lecture series is a project of the University of Chicago Center for International Studies.
Let's go ahead and get started. I'm Kathleen Morrison, Director of the Center for International Studies. Thanks for coming here tonight to our second event in our month-long series on food security and insecurity. Information about all of our events is available on our website and on the many handouts and flyers throughout the room. I'd also like to invite you to consider liking us on Facebook, which will give you access to our postings of upcoming events. And for those of you whose interests run toward the environmental, you can also like our affiliated unit, the Program on the Global Environment. We would encourage you also to join in the Twitter conversation that's running throughout this series, and we're using the same hashtag for the entire series, which is CIS Food Security, all one word. Our next event is Wednesday, May 9th, when we'll consider both the alternative frameworks of both food security and food sovereignty. In the first event of this series, Ken Cook of the Environmental Working Group helped to set the context for many key issues in food security in the United States by discussing the 2012 Farm Bill. And today we're going to move in a little more closely and specifically to consider problems of access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food in the United States, and especially right here in Cook County. And we're very pleased tonight to have two important analysts of and actors in this scene, Professor Craig Gundersen of the University of Illinois and Sophie Milam, the Senior Policy Counsel at Feeding America. Craig Gundersen is a professor in the Department of Agricultural and Consumer Economics at the University of Illinois, and he's also the executive director of the National Soybean Research Laboratory. He's a member of Feeding America's Technical Advisory Group and is the lead researcher in the Map the Meal Gap project. Professor Gundersen, working with Feeding America and the Greater Chicago Food Depository, has recently studied rates of food insecurity throughout Cook County, work showing that nearly 21% of Chicago residents are food insecure. The title of his talk today is Addressing Food Insecurity in the United States. We're also delighted to have Sophie Milam, who is the Senior Policy Counsel at Feeding America, the nation's largest hunger relief charity. As part of the public policy team, Ms. Milam develops and advocates for policies and programs to reduce hunger. Her work focuses on securing resources, very important, to support the work of food banks and emergency food providers, and to strengthen federal nutrition programs, especially SNAP and child nutrition programs. 1 in 8 Americans, a terrifying number, receives food assistance each year through the Feeding America network of over 200 food banks. This network distributes food to over 61,000 local pantries, kitchens, and shelters. Together, they serve 37 million Americans, a number that represents a 46% increase just between 2006 and 2010. The title of Ms. Milam's presentation today is Balancing the Budget in a Time of Need, Protecting Programs that Protect the Hungry. So our format tonight is, as you obviously can tell, we have two speakers. So Professor Gundersen will speak first, and then followed by Sophie Milam, and then we'll have some time for question and answer at the end.
Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity to be here. I was very excited when Jamie contacted me to present here, so I really do appreciate this. It's an amazing series. I'm honored to be a part of all the great researchers and others who are speaking on this, and it's always good to be on a panel with Sophie, so I'm very pleased. And I wanted to thank all of you for coming to this tonight. There's many other things you could be doing, so I really appreciate your attendance. So, from my perspective, the reason why I'm really happy that this is a series of lectures on this is, from my perspective, food insecurity is the most important public health issue related to nutrition in the U.S. today. Other topics get more attention from the media, for example, obesity, and we could talk about this later, but from my perspective, food insecurity is the most important one, and so we need to draw attention to it. It's important in part because so many people are affected by it. In any given year, especially now once the Great Recession continues with its manifestations, is almost 50 million Americans are in food insecure households. So the magnitude is large. is a number of millions of Americans, tens of millions of Americans, are suffering from food insecurity. That should be, is important in and of itself. But there's also serious consequences associated with food insecurity. From my perspective, is that the children are going to bed hungry, that seniors don't know when their next meal is coming from. This is important, even if there was nothing else, no other consequences associated with this. But coming back to this is a public health issue. There's many, many demonstrated consequences associated with food insecurity. There's dozens of papers which have demonstrated the many serious consequences associated with food insecurity. So even if somebody doesn't care about the children are going hungry or that seniors go to bed at night without enough food, maybe they'll be concerned about these health consequences associated with food insecurity. So in my talk today, what I'm going to begin is by talking about how we define food insecurity and some discussion about the dimensions of food insecurity. And then what I want to then discuss is what can we do to address this. And as part of what we can do to address this is I'm going to talk at the conclusion about what I see as two threats to what can prevent us from being able to address this issue. Okay, so we're all on the same page with respect to how we define food insecurity. I begin with that. There's 18 questions that are posed on what's called the core food security module. And through responses to the 18 questions we're able to establish whether or not somebody is food insecure. So these are examples of questions. The least severe question is, I worried whether our food would run out before we got money to buy more. So this gets at the notion that some people, food insecurity may just manifest itself as worries about whether or not they have enough food. The most severe question for households with families is, for households with children, did a child in the household ever not eat for a full day because you couldn't afford enough food? Now, fortunately in the United States, this last question is rarely responded to affirmatively, but this is the most severe question that's on the survey. So we say that somebody is defined as being food insecure if they have 3 or more affirmative responses, and then very low food secure if they have 8 or more affirmative responses, both for households with children. I'm going to be talking a little bit about issues specifically pertaining to children, but as you can see here is there's a special category for children called very low food security among children if somebody has 5 or 4 more affirmative responses to child-specific questions. One of the goals of the Obama administration was to eliminate childhood hunger by 2015. And so, unfortunately, that goal is not going to be met, but one of the things that they've more specifically defined as alleviating very low food security amongst children by 2015. So I'll talk a little bit about that later. So why do we want to look at food insecurity? As I mentioned before, there's serious consequences in its own right, and there's negative health outcomes. I already covered these. The other reason is that it's not completely characterized by income. So we have many different measures of well-being in the United States, and one of them, for example, is poverty. So we measure what percentage of people are poor, things like that. About 50% of poor Americans are food secure. So despite not having enough money, they're able to be food secure. Conversely, is about 10% of households with incomes above the poverty line who seemingly have enough money are food insecure. So income does not exactly characterize this. The other thing is about nutrient intakes. So while there's a close correlation between food insecurity and nutrient intakes, food insecure households have lower nutrient intakes, there's many families, households that may have poor nutrient intakes and be food secure. So it's not completely characterized by that. In other words, somebody can always say, well, why do we need yet another measure of well-being? Well, in food insecurity is the current existing measures do not portray it, so we needed new measures. And I'm going to come to later is this seems to be a leading indicator of some of the problems facing poor Americans today. From a policy perspective, it's also relevant, is a central goal of the USDA is to alleviate food insecurity. When I discuss the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as the Food Stamp Program, SNAP, is that it's central, that central goal of that program, and really is to alleviate food insecurity. 80%, I think is it 80% of all USDA's budget is for food assistance programs, right? Roughly. Yeah, 70 to 80. I was hoping that we'd have the answer. So a large proportion of that, and I think about 60% alone goes to SNAP, a very high proportion. So when we talk about USDA, a lot of people just think about it in terms of agriculture policy for farmers. But really, USDA is really a food assistance department rather than agriculture. Of course, that's part of it too. But wanted to discuss that. The other thing is that every year the USDA Economic Research Service comes out with extent of food insecurity in the United States. And this is pretty closely followed by policymakers. I used to live in DC, and it oftentimes would be, below the fold news about food insecurity, the annual report. So it is closely followed by the press and by others, and in particular by policymakers. So these are all some of the reasons why I would argue that we should be looking at food insecurity. Okay, so this then gives us, you concentrate on the 2000 time period going forward because this is when there's a consistent measure of food insecurity. But you can see is that even during good economic times, like most of the 2000s were, is that food insecurity rate was about 11%. So about 1 in 8 Americans were food insecure. This here, though, in 2007, 2008, was a huge jump up. This is a 30% increase in food insecurity. Now, it is unprecedented, but there's not a lot of years to look at. But this was a huge increase. Earlier, I mentioned that we have to measure if the food insecurity might be a bellwether. Poverty rates didn't increase until later. So if you want to know what's going to happen to poor people in the United States, is you may want to, food insecurity actually seems to be a leading indicator. At least in the Great Recession, it was a leading indicator before other indicators of well-being. And what you can see is, despite the, technical end of the Great Recession, is that food insecurity rates remain high. Okay? They definitely have not fallen back down to levels before this, so they remain high. The more serious measure of very low food security, similar patterns, it increased. So it was a slight dip in 2010, but not meaningful, not substantively meaningful, and definitely not to what it was before. Okay, so this gives you some notion about the extent of food insecurity. There's a great deal of geographic diversity, and I'm not going to talk about how this is defined or anything, but Feeding America has what's called Map the Meal Gap, which provides county-level estimates of food insecurity for all counties in the United States. So then we can begin to say what's the extent of food insecurity, and there's an amazing amount of diversity across the United States in terms of county-level estimates of food insecurity. So this is for Illinois. 15% of all residents, all persons in Illinois are food insecure, which is actually lower than, Illinois seems to be doing pretty good if you compare this to some other states with much higher rates. So the upper Midwest seems to do better than other parts of the country. So about 15% of here, and then the food insecurity rate for the Greater Chicago Food Depository, which is in Cook County, is slightly higher, 15.6%. What you can see here is that the number of food insecure people is 807,000. So almost 1 million people in Cook County alone are food insecure. Oh, I was going to move that there. You can, well, I don't have to point at it, it's circled. That's why you would circle it. So what you see here then is that about 1 in 3 households that are food insecure in Cook County are eligible for SNAP, the food stamp program. Okay? Almost half are ineligible for any program. So we have a huge group of people who are food insecure who are not eligible for SNAP, but they're also not even eligible, their children if are not eligible for the National School Lunch Program or School Breakfast Program, or if they're younger, for WIC. So I'm going to come back to this a little bit later, but I'm going to be talking a lot about SNAP, but when we talk about that, we have to realize that it doesn't reach all food insecure households. For the Greater Chicago Food Depository, this is communities within Cook County. Now, a couple caveats is I tried to put this all into one page, and then I had this originally larger, but a lot of Cook County it's not all of Cook County, but it's the areas that they highlighted on their thing. So I have no idea where these places are. But where's Fort Heights? Is that near Hyde Park?
Further south. We're near Washington Park.
So where's Hyde Park on here?
Near Washington Park.
Washington Park.
Up.
So tell me when to stop. Oh, Hyde Park's all the way up here?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was on the south side. But okay. But south side of Chicago. Oh, so Chicago's not all Cook County. Okay, anyway, okay. So you're right up here. Okay, so Hyde Park's in Washington Park, or it's next to it?
Just to the east.
Just east. Okay, that's where Hyde Park is. Okay, you have low rates of food insecurity in Hyde Park. But in Washington Park, as you can see, right next to you is very high rates of very high rates of food insecurity, and then also Englewood also has very. So what you can see is even within this, small part of Cook County, is there's an amazing amount of diversity in terms of people's experiences of food insecurity. So consistent with this is that across the United States there's a great deal of diversity, and even when we look at communities. So, like how far south is Chicago? Is this part of Chicago, or is this Cook County? This is the south suburbs. Okay, so like Flossmoor and places like that. Okay, I see. I didn't know that those were in Cook County. Learn something new every day. Okay, so this is then the child food insecurity rates. I do not have this broken down by community within Chicago, but children suffer from food insecurity disproportionately more than all individuals. And you can see for Illinois as a whole, it's 22%. But actually, Cook County is actually doing pretty good. It has a lower rate of food insecurity than the rest of Illinois. This is in part because, especially in some of the southern counties in Illinois, and some of them, for example, where East St. Louis is, or where Danville is, and Decatur, you have really high rates of food insecurity. So that it's higher in the rest of the state is not that surprising. But this means that there's about 250,000 children in Chicago alone, or Cook County alone, that are suffering from food insecurity. Like with other groups, is 34%, about 1 in 3 children are not eligible for any food assistance program. Okay. So this gives you some background a little bit about the geographic diversity of food insecurity in the United States. Probably the key determinant of whether or not somebody's food insecure is income. So I'm going to be using this graph for a lot of things in what follows. Okay. So here is the probability of food insecurity by income. So what I want you to do is concentrate on this black line here. So this gives the food insecurity rates, and on this axis we have the income to poverty ratio. On this axis we have the probability of food insecurity. And this is a non-parametric representation of the probability of being food insecure. So this line here is the cutoff for SNAP. This line here is the cutoff for other nutrition assistance programs. So we can see is in this area people have higher rates of food insecurity. Then when you move to this area, they steadily decline. Okay? So clearly income is a key determinant of food insecurity. There's 2 main ways we can address food insecurity. One key way is to say, holding incomes constant. So suppose we don't improve incomes in the United States, can we move these lines downward? In other words, given an income level, can we make the probability of food insecurity lower? So I'm going to talk about 4 ways to do this. The first way is to lower food prices. In other words, to make it such that any given level of income, for any level of nominal income, their real income is higher if we lower food prices. This is why I always maintain one of the best things that can happen to a poor community is to have a Walmart or a Meijer or another major food store move into their community. Because what this does enables families to purchase, healthy, affordable food at cheaper prices. So we always have to remember that we have to try to maintain efforts to lower food prices in the United States, because while it may not make much difference having lower food prices for middle class and rich families, for poor families it's dramatically important because a large proportion of their budgets go towards food. The other thing is increase access to food sources. This follows from the first one is we want lower food prices, so we want to have people have food readily available, and also is that we want to make sure that people can readily access a Walmart or other place like this. This is especially a concern in a lot of rural areas where there may not be a lot of food available nearby. One of my research areas is looking at food insecurity amongst American Indians, and in a lot of reservations, the nearest food store could be an hour and a half away. So when we think about the quote-unquote food deserts, especially in some areas, they're really relevant. One area that we've been looking at recently is to improve financial management skills. As we did a study, and we found that people who have better financial management skills, all else equal, are much less likely to be food insecure. So ways to encourage people to help them manage their money is better. The other thing that can't be emphasized is to remove other hindrances. For those of you, the challenges of being poor in the United States are manifold. People oftentimes live in dangerous neighborhoods if they're poor. They oftentimes go to schools which aren't particularly good in their neighborhood. They face many, many challenges. And so piling on top of all these other challenges is they may face challenges getting enough food. By making things easier, by addressing the deeper problem of poverty in the United States can also help out with this. The other thing we can do is we can, at any given, we can try to shift these curves. We can move people along the curve. So in other words, we can try to move people from here to here to here. Okay? There's many different policies we can use to do that. But what I want to concentrate today is SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. So I can't emphasize this enough. The primary, so I'm going to define SNAP in a little while, but first I want to talk just briefly about it. The primary goal is the alleviation of food insecurity. People can talk all they want about SNAP doing other things. Its first and foremost goal is to alleviate food insecurity, and any other thing we ask SNAP to do has to be evaluated in terms of whether or not it's going to improve its ability to alleviate food insecurity or cause hindrances to it, and I'm going to talk about that later. So I'm going to pose two key questions that we have to look at. To what extent does SNAP meet this goal? And are SNAP benefit levels sufficient to meet this goal? So if you get, posing two questions. If you get SNAP, are you less likely to be food insecure? Or if you get SNAP and you're still food insecure, is it because there's not enough money associated with SNAP? So I'm going to do a little bit of, I'm an economist, so just a little bit of economics. This is, on this axis we have the amount of food that somebody has. On this axis we have other goods like housing, medical care, and things like this. So if somebody consumes food in this area, they're food secure. If they consume food in, other goods in this area, then they're sufficient over this. So we say then that somebody is food insecure if their consumption bundle is in this area. What we want to do, as what I think we'd want to do as a society, is make sure that people can move into this area. So we want them to be food secure, but we'd also like them to have sufficient housing and other necessities. Okay, this is a budget constraint. So this is given prices of food, given prices of other goods, is this person's can consume in this region. So somebody could be food secure. As I mentioned before, a lot of poor people are food secure, but they have to forego other things. So a family could be food secure, but maybe they're foregoing needed medical care. Okay? So conversely, but the point to emphasize here is you cannot be both food secure and have sufficient levels of other goods. So this is what SNAP does, is it shifts up this curve. Don't worry about this down. There's a reason why it's truncated here. So what SNAP does is for people who are close to the poverty line is it enables them to then consume enough food such that they're food secure. So they're here, and then they're here, and they at least have the capability of consuming enough food. This doesn't mean everybody's going to be consuming enough food. Somebody could get SNAP, so they're at this point in their budget constraint. They move up to here. It could be the case is that in their family they have lots of other expenditures that they have to do on healthcare and other things. They're still food insecure despite receiving SNAP. For other households, I didn't want to do it. For other households, is even if they get SNAP, is not enough to raise them to food insecurity. So SNAP for some people makes them food secure. Other people are still food insecure despite receiving SNAP. So what is SNAP? It's known known colloquially in Illinois as link card. So for example, I was driving up 67th, what's this, Marquette Road to East 67th Street, coming off the interstate, and there was a convenience store that said, we accept link. So link is the colloquial term for foods for SNAP in the United States. This is by far the largest food assistance program in the United States, and here's some information about the benefit levels. So as you can see, it's large, based on benefit levels. It's almost $700 maximum for a family of four. This is the major amount of money, $300 for a family of four. And its magnitude is wide. Almost 40 million Americans receive SNAP. Okay? And it's the largest near cash assistance program in the United States. Who is eligible for this program is, I'm not going to go much into this, but the way to summarize this is people who are getting SNAP are both income poor and asset poor. So like 10 more minutes? 10, okay. Is that fine? Okay. Why don't people participate? We have this amazing program, but about 40, depending upon how you measure it, about 40% of Americans, despite being eligible for this program, do not participate. So the question becomes, from a policy perspective, why don't people think? The first one is stigma. SNAP is different than other types of assistance. For example, if I'm getting unemployment benefits and I go to a store, nobody knows that I'm using unemployment benefits to purchase food. But SNAP, I'm publicly revealing. So I go to a food store and I use my link card to purchase this. So for some people is they may feel stigma. When I was a kid, the main thing about SNAP was, or food stamp at the time was, if some people might perceive it as if somebody's receiving food stamps is that they're quote unquote lazy. And why should they be, using food stamps as opposed to cash? Stigma's changed a lot today. And you talk to SNAP recipients, and the main stigma they feel is because, as you all know in America, people seem kind of obsessed with obesity. And one thing that this means then is I've heard people literally say, why should overweight people be getting SNAP? So you talk to SNAP recipients, they say when they go up to purchase their food, and if they may be overweight like myself, is they will go up there and people behind them looking like, it used to be people would call people getting SNAP lazy, now they call them, why are they overweight, shouldn't they be lazy? So it's a new form of stigma. So in our society, as you all know, overweight and obesity is one of the few remaining stigmas that's socially acceptable, unfortunately. But one of the reasons is by stigmatizing people who are overweight, is that's one of the leading causes why some people do not receive SNAP. There's also transaction costs and low benefit levels. Is SNAP successful? Absolutely. This is an amazing program. If we want to think about successful programs in the United States, look at SNAP. It has a goal of alleviating food insecurity, and it does. It's a stylized fact. These are just some of the studies that have shown this. In fact, so I guess I'd say unambiguously, SNAP achieves its main goal of alleviating food insecurity. This is a paper that's forthcoming in the Journal of American Statistical Association by Brent Kreider, John Pepper, myself, and Dean Jolliffe. And what do we show? I'm not going to go into the technical details of it, but depending upon how we measure this, SNAP leads to a reduction in a comparison to a world with everybody receiving SNAP versus a world where nobody receives SNAP is 15 percentage points lower as food insecurity rates. That's at a minimum. We also have higher estimates depending upon how we measure it. This is a fantastically successful program. It does what it's set out to do. So I'm going to come to some threats to this program. So we have to remember, we have a program. We better be real careful about messing with it because it does a great job at what it does. I'm not an advocate, and unfortunately sometimes I think I sound like an advocate. Well, it's fine being an advocate, but I'm just saying I try to be objective about this, but it really is an amazing program. I'm going to skip over this a little bit, but this is a question where they asked people how much money would they need to be food secure, and out of eligible SNAP-eligible households, which you can see is even out of these SNAP-eligible households who are receiving SNAP, is a lot of them report on average about $16 a month more they would need. So SNAP benefits are not sufficient for many households to be food secure. So what are the policy implications of this? I'm going to break these into two main things. Again, SNAP is, I don't have to say that again, but in particular, we have to have caution with respect to, SNAP is a great program, but unfortunately, those on the left attack it and those on the right attack it for different ways. Okay? So what I want to do is I want to talk about caution with respect to two changes. I'm going to go into more details momentarily. Some on the right have proposed switching to block grants. In other words, not getting rid of its entitlement status and making it a block grant. Some on the left have been talking about restricting purchases. In other words, not allowing SNAP recipients to purchase whatever types of food items they want. But before turning to those, I do want to talk a little bit about SNAP benefits. It's seemingly too low for at least some recipients. Okay? So we may want to consider changes to the benefit formula. Especially, I would argue that we should raise the minimum amount. Currently, it depends on the type of household, but it's roughly $10 a month. I would argue that to encourage more people into the program, we should raise those benefit levels. The other thing is that we've had a benefit formula for SNAP that's been since its existence, since its introduction, where for every additional dollar you earn, your SNAP benefits fall by 30 cents. I would argue that maybe we have to start thinking about rethinking how that benefit formula is done over certain ranges. We can talk more about that if we wish. But given the SNAP benefits are seemingly too low for these some recipients, we have to think about ways that we have to increase SNAP benefits. So Sophie may be talking about this later, but so there's been some recent calls to decrease SNAP benefits so that in reality, I think we should be doing the opposite, increasing them. But I first want to talk about some things. Okay. This graph here so I want to first talk about block granting. So what happens when things are block granted? The government's, I'm not an expert on fiscal policy or the policies that go to this, but block grants work as follows, is with an entitlement program with SNAP, no matter how many people need SNAP benefits, the program expands to feed all of them. Okay? With block grants, the way it works is a set amount of money is given to each state, and when that money runs out, it runs out. Okay? So some have proposed to block grant SNAP. There could be some advantages to the block granting SNAP. One advantage is states might do more creative things with their money that the federal government isn't doing. I don't know. But the one thing that will be damaging if we switch to block grants is look what happens during economic recessions. You look here, and the number of SNAP participants increased dramatically. If we were in block grants, if we had set up block grants like in 2000 when benefits were very low, there's no way it would have increased to meet all these new people. Or if we even set it at this level here in 2006, we would have had this huge increase. By getting rid of the entitlement status of SNAP is that we would, and moving it to block grants, would pose a real serious threat to poor families, especially during economic recessions. Okay, the other policy conclusion I wanted to talk about is this. Should we restrict purchases? There's been talk among some that we should restrict SNAP recipients. We should say, oh, they can't purchase Gatorade. Oh, they can't purchase apple juice, all these other things that we say. This was a proposal in New York by the New York Department of Health or some other crazy group out there. Fortunately, FNS said, no, you can't restrict SNAP purchases. They made the right decision. I'm going to talk about. My concern is that this, well, the answer is no, but I should look at my papers, I guess, see what comes next. The answer is no, and I didn't, well, I should put an exclamation point, but is that, and I want to show why the answer is no, and why this I see as a more serious threat than block granting. Okay? If we start to restrict SNAP purchases, who knows when it's going to stop? And I'm going to mention that Muslim. First of all, is people always say, oh, SNAP leads to increases in obesity. First of all, that is not the goal of the program, so it doesn't make any difference even if it did lead. But that's crazy talk. It's like saying, okay, I used to work for the federal government, and whenever I put on a few pounds and people say, oh, Gundersen, he must have gotten a raise, that's why he's bigger now. That's the same thing with SNAP, is you give people more money for food. It's not like all of a sudden they're going to become more and more. So a priori, there's no reason we'd expect SNAP to be related to obesity. Or by this criteria, Bill Gates should be the largest man in America because he's one of the richer ones. Just crazy talk. But we also show in our Journal of American Statistical Association paper that SNAP actually leads to reductions in obesity. So first of all, we shouldn't be concerned about this issue. This is why people are talking about restricting purchases. This is why they're talking about it, is to reduce obesity. But if that's the reason for it, and it doesn't lead to increases in obesity, why mess with it? It's been boggling to me, but you know people. So, okay, some people are just, anyway, so the administrative costs. So why don't we want to do this? There's many different reasons we want to do this. First of all, it's dumb, but the other reason is the administrative costs are really high. The costs to the retailer are non-trivial. If they have to reprogram all their things to say, this apple juice, you can't use SNAP benefits for this, but you can use it for this, it gets really time-consuming and it's difficult. It's not easy to reprogram these things. The other thing is, what constitutes healthy food and unhealthy food? Okay? Who's going to make these decisions? Like, is 2% milk bad? Oh, maybe not, but whole milk is. Or maybe we say only certain cuts of meat has to be a certain lean. Or what if all of a sudden we say we want all SNAP recipients to go to vegetarian? What constitutes this? And from one year to the next, it changes. I mean, who's going to define these things? And okay. So, why do people, what would happen if we did this? You change this program, I can guarantee you what's going to happen. There will be declines in participation. There's increased stigma. If you start telling people you can choose this, you can't choose this, that further stigmatizes the program. That further stigmatizes recipients. Okay? To say you can purchase this. So you go up to purchase. If I'm a SNAP recipient, I go up to purchase my food, and all of a sudden I have to set aside all my food that's not approved. I mean, we don't want to stigmatize people who are struggling. That just seems wrong. And by doing this, is we'd further stigmatize persons who are receiving SNAP. The other thing is that there's more limited choices. Whenever you limit choices for a program, participation falls. Okay? This is shown again and again and again. So we know that for sure that if we change around this program, there's going to be fewer people participating. So whenever people propose to restrict choices of SNAP recipients, is your response to them is, do we really want millions of more children suffering, millions more people suffering from food insecurity, so people can be more judgmental about how people consume their precious dollars? That's it. Thank you.
Hello. I just want to echo Craig's comments about how excited I am to be here with you all. It's nice, first of all, to get out of DC, which is kind of a crazy place these days, and have a real conversation about policy. Turns out we're not really doing that in Washington right now. So this is exciting. And also, you know, I have worked at an anti-hunger organization for about the last 6 or 7 years. And prior to that, worked on Capitol Hill, also working on poverty and hunger issues in addition to some other policy areas. And it all really started from experiences that I had when I was in school. When I went to college and was engaged in the volunteer work and talking with friends about sort of how would you solve these problems, how are these problems being solved, what can we do? And so it's just really exciting to be here and talking to you all and thinking about these issues. So we know who I am. It's great. Let me tell you a little bit about Feeding America. We represent about 200 food banks around the country. And food banks are rarely directly giving food to people. They're more the distribution center. So we serve, those 200 food banks support 61,000 local agencies. That's a soup kitchen, a church pantry, a hot meals program. And together, that network serves 37 million people each year, which is tremendous. We're distributing about 3 billion pounds of food through this network. And so what Feeding America does is to help acquire that food for those food banks. In addition, though, to traditional food banking, increasingly, I mean, these are organizations that are really at the hub of food insecurity in their communities. They're operating summer feeding programs, after-school programs for children. They're doing outreach to connect clients to the SNAP program. Many of them are operating their own gardens or teaching nutrition education and providing cooking demonstrations to help promote nutrition in addition to addressing food insecurity. And so they're really running the gamut in terms of how we can help low-income families address their food security needs. As Craig mentioned, and as we all know, food insecurity increased sharply during the recession, so I won't belabor that point. But as a backdrop to how the programs responded, I think it's really remarkable, to Craig's point about SNAP being able to grow when need grows. It's the core and most fundamentally important feature of the program. Here we see the increase in participation on the household level for SNAP and how that paralleled with the increase in unemployment pre-recession and sort of in the middle of the recession. And food banks saw very similar increases in demand. So I think the numbers from 2007 to 2011 is that unemployment grew 94%. SNAP participation over that period grew 70%. So it's responding as it should. Food banks saw an increase in participation or increase in clients of about 46% between 2006 and 2010. So we have a very strong nutrition safety net in our country, and when it was tested the most in recent years, it really responded effectively to meet growing need. SNAP is, there's always a lot of fun stories in the newspaper about SNAP, lots of stigma. We tend to like the sensational stories, so I did want to take a moment to describe the client. I like to say that the program's timely, targeted, and temporary because people like alliteration, but it is true. So it's timely, right, in that it responded very effectively to growing need in the recession. It's a program that's targeted for better or for worse at our most vulnerable. So 76% of households have a child, a senior, or a disabled person. and 85% of households are at 100% of poverty or below. You can actually be at up to 130% of poverty and qualify for SNAP, but the vast majority of households are truly poor. And that's important to remind people when we're having conversations about stigma and do people really need these benefits? And then finally, the last point is that they're temporary. The average amount of time that someone spends on the program is about 8 to 10 months. So it's there, it responds quickly when they have need, and it effectively transitions them off of the program when their situation stabilizes. That doesn't mean that there aren't folks who are on the program for years. There's persistent high poverty in our country, and so the program, unfortunately, is not meant to solve poverty or the underlying issues, but in terms of solving the food insecurity that is associated with poverty, the program is very effective. Unfortunately, as Craig noted, there are a few gaps that the program is not meeting, and one of those is that the benefit level is not quite enough for many households to meet their food needs. So the average food stamp benefit is $1.50 per person per meal, which you may have heard about the Food Stamp Challenge that many communities have done to raise awareness about this issue and the difficulty of preparing an adequate, nutritious diet on that limited allotment. We also know that about 90% of SNAP benefits are redeemed by day 21. So after 3 weeks, most people have run through their SNAP benefits. Those are folks who are often coming to our food pantries to help make ends meet, and many of our clients who are also on SNAP, which is remarkable that there is such need that is not being met. The other piece that Craig pointed out is that there are plenty of people who are food insecure who are not income eligible for SNAP, and those folks too have nowhere to turn but to the charitable sector. And again, so food banks are really helping to fill in the gaps where SNAP is not quite able to fully meet need. Just to give a little bit of context before I get into the main focus of my remarks, I think the programs have responded very effectively in the recession, but there continue to be real challenges. The need remains at historic highs. We have families are suffering from the challenge of higher gas prices, really high food inflation in the last couple of years. I think gas prices went up about 26% in 2011. Food prices in the last half of 2011 grew at 6%, which is more than twice their average annual rate of inflation for the last couple decades. And so that's hitting low-income families who are having to make choices between, okay, do I fill the gas or do I go to the grocery store? Do I pay that medical bill or do I, put food on the table? It's also hitting our food banks because it's increasing the cost for us to purchase and distribute food to people. So all of these things are increasing, decreasing. Unfortunately, the biggest federal support for food banks is something called the Emergency Food Assistance Program, aptly named. It provides about 25% of the food that we distribute. Other sources are food that we purchase, donations from manufacturers, retailers, individual charitable donations from communities. But so that 25% is a significant portion. And because part of that is tied to farm prices, again, grocery prices are higher, farm income is higher, there's been a drop-off in some of the donation to that program because they haven't needed to support farmers. So you have a situation where the need for food is higher than ever, but the supply is going down. Many states and local governments have had to cut programs for low-income people, and of course the conversation in Washington is all about how do we balance the budget, where can we find cuts. So the main takeaway here is need is high and supply is low and under threat of being lower. So I think, what are a couple of policy changes that we could support or that we could look to improve our ability to address food insecurity? Again, looking at our benefit levels adequate and knowing that there are more people who need assistance than who are currently eligible for the biggest federal program, is that something we want to explore? And then looking at the supply issue for the charitable sector. Unfortunately, policy is, fortunately or unfortunately, policy doesn't happen in a vacuum, and so even if we know what works or what needs to be done, it doesn't mean that we can necessarily make that happen, and that's kind of where my job is taking important work like Craig does, you know, working together to figure out what are the policy recommendations, and then figuring out what we can actually get done in Congress. And so I want to talk a little bit today about what some of the major, what are some of the driving dynamics and pulls and pushing and pulling this debate, and that's going to impact our ability to make progress on the policy priorities that we would like to advance, or even just to hold ground on our current state of play. And so looking at the political landscape, some of the budget implications, that conversation, this growing interest in nutrition and obesity, and then some takeaways for a big piece of legislation which is under consideration this year, which is the Farm Bill, and it's part of your series. So the Farm Bill includes both SNAP and the Emergency Food Assistance Program. And the decisions that are made in this bill will certainly impact our ability to address food security in the coming years. So we have a challenging political landscape in Washington. Breaking news. You know, anti-hunger programs have long enjoyed strong bipartisan support. They were created, many of them under the Johnson and Nixon administrations. They were expanded by the efforts of bipartisan McGovern and Dole in Congress. And these are programs that have traditionally enjoyed bipartisan support. That has started to change, and that really changed in the last Congress. So Congress serves two-year blocks, and the one leading up to the big election with the Tea Party that was very dramatic, that Congress changed things. We saw almost no legislation moving, and when it did move, it was strictly on you know, a partisan vote. So things like the stimulus package or healthcare reform, these were very partisan votes. And while there was always some of that on more political issues, people would tend to come together around issues that they could agree upon. And hunger was typically one of those. The child nutrition bill, folks may be familiar with, was a really landmark piece of legislation. Everybody loves kids. Nobody wants kids to go hungry. And the fact that this became a partisan bill that almost didn't go through, they had to cut SNAP to help pay for it, really was a sign that the tides were changing and that we had to be very concerned about the ability just to hold ground on these programs. It's also worth noting that there's been a historic bipartisan commitment to protecting all low-income programs in past deficit reduction agreements. So this is true of the 3 major deficit reduction agreements in the 90s, and it's also true of the Bowles-Simpson recommendations, even the Budget Control Act, that debt ceiling deal that was passed in August of last year, protected, by and large, low-income programs from being subject to these across-the-board cuts. And that's an important commitment when we know that we can't sort of balance the budget on the backs of those who are least able to afford. They've already given their share. Much of the political polarization is driven by this conversation around the budget. You know, I think there are different ideas about how to get our fiscal house in order. There's pressure to cut spending, there's pressure to raise revenues, but what essentially this has created is that because this is happening at the backdrop of really increased need, you have SNAP growing, as it should, to respond to increased need right at a time where all programs are facing increased scrutiny. And so it's very easy to look and say, boy, what is this program doing? It's growing out of control. It's, you know, participation's gone up 70% in the last few years. Something must be wrong with the program. So that presents a real challenge in terms of how do we look at how do we serve people and how do we continue to talk about policy in this climate. So just for a little bit of perspective, we do have a real problem with the deficit in our country. And so it's by arguing that we shouldn't be cutting programs that serve low-income people is not to suggest that we don't have a problem that needs to be fixed and that there are very tough choices about how to close that. I think there's an estimate, so what would it take to close this gap? You would need to increase tax revenues immediately by 24%, or do an immediate across-the-board cut to spending of 20%. That's drastic. That is, so clearly you can't solve it only through tax increases or only through cuts, because that would be incredibly severe. So it will likely take some sort of balance, and these are very difficult choices that are having to be made. It is worth noting as well that within this block, that 14% other entitlement programs, that's where SNAP and all the federal nutrition programs live. I think they're about 2% of the federal budget right now. Historically have been in the 1.5%, 1.8% range. So when you're looking at huge program growth, it's also important to keep in perspective how that budget or how that program fits in terms of overall federal spending. And this is why a lot of the conversation when we're talking about deficit reduction has been around entitlement reform of Social Security and Medicaid, or defense spending, or raising taxes, because there is some recognition that if we go piecemeal, program by program with these smaller programs, we're not going to get anywhere near that 20% that we need to get to. So with that, what does this mean for hunger policy? It means that, for one, there's tremendous pressure to cut spending at a time when the need for these programs has never been higher. It also means that if we wanted to have a policy conversation about how to strengthen the programs, whether that's through expanding, improving benefit adequacy or expanding eligibility, or if we even wanted to have a conversation about, well, how can we make them operate more efficiently? It's a very scary time to have that conversation. The entire focus in Washington right now is about hitting a budget number. And what happens is that people lose sight of what does that mean for a program? What does that mean for a person? When you're talking about a 20% cut to food stamps, what does that mean in terms of the benefit loss that low-income families will see? Who are these faceless people that are going to be impacted by these decisions? And unfortunately, there is such a frenzy around hitting those budget numbers that conversation is really being lost. And so you have proposals like we saw earlier this year in the House budget resolution to cut SNAP by 20%, $134 billion, which would be absolutely devastating. This is not a real policy proposal. Nobody thinks this is going anywhere. But that's the conversation that's happening. So where do we fit in? How do you have a conversation about really making progress on this issue, or even holding the line in the context of this crazy polarized debate? The other piece is that while this is largely, much of the standoff is driven by concerns about spending, there's also some concerns about the role of government, right? One of the things that we hear a lot at food banks is, you guys are doing a great job, we should just let you take care of it. And food banks are working really, really hard in their communities and scrambling. They're one of the busiest places that you can visit. But overall, the estimate that we've heard is that charitable feeding in our country is about 6% of all the spending in the U.S. on addressing hunger. So it's a very important piece, but it's relatively small in comparison. And if you're talking about cutting SNAP by 20%, charity's not going to be able to make up the difference. They can hardly keep up with the demands that they're seeing right now. So in terms of the role of government and the role of charity and how we solve our problems, that's another piece, and it's an important piece to remember. Oh yes, I like this little slide. So it's fun that they talk about reform, but it's not really reform, it's just cuts. So the third kind of landscape dynamic that's been impacting, and Craig alluded to this as well, it's like we planned this, but we really didn't, is the growing interest in nutrition. Certainly, obesity is a lot more visible than hunger in our country, right? We can see obesity. And while there's a lot of stigma around obesity, I might argue that, nobody's really self-identifying as I'm poor, I'm going hungry. And so it does seem to have caught the attention of well, this is a problem that's very visible and that we can address. I think the First Lady's efforts on childhood obesity, in particular the Let's Move campaign, has also elevated that conversation. And as Craig has mentioned, there's, well, should we be restricting choice in the SNAP program? What does that mean? One of the differences between SNAP and other nutrition programs that makes it a challenge in this conversation is that I think it's fair to say that every other federal nutrition program has some kind of nutrition requirements. So even the food that is donated to our food banks has to be low salt, vegetables that are low salt, fruits that are canned in water or low sugar, low fat meat, and the child nutrition programs certainly have strict requirements in terms of providing the right nutrients for kids. Senior nutrition programs also are meant not to be providing their entire food needs, but to supplement with the specific nutrition and vitamins that tend to be lacking in the senior population. So nutrition is a big part of the conversation of every other anti-hunger program that is out there. So it was probably only a matter of time that become part of the conversation with SNAP. But as Craig said, the program is not currently designed to be an anti-obesity program. If we want it to be an anti-obesity program, then it's a whole other conversation. If you're changing the mission of the program, there's a small amount of money, small relative to the size of the program overall, that goes to nutrition education. It's meant to teach families how to stretch your budget. So Craig was also talking about, financial management or managing your household income. Certainly, if you're suddenly find yourself struggling to make ends meet, how you shop, how you cook, how you make your food dollars last is something that is new and foreign and you have to figure out. And the reality is that most people right now aren't making meals from scratch every night of the week. I love it when you read kind of the comment posts to articles, and people get very fired up about this issue and they say, well, I can go buy a bag of rice and a bag of dried beans and I could feed myself for 3 months. That's fair. But the reality is that most people aren't soaking beans overnight when they prepare their food. You're talking about a population that has a myriad of challenges facing them and how they make ends meet. And so now we want to expect them to make every meal from scratch. I mean, some of this conversation has to be within the reality of our culture and how people actually live their day-to-day lives. But I do think that it is a fair conversation to be had. And even if I didn't, I think the conversation's moving. So it's one that has been growing and building and will certainly continue. Part of the other reason for that is that when you look at, this is a lovely map that came to us care of Craig's work on the Map the Meal Gap project. So you see the darker areas are areas that have greater food insecurity. And I wish I could do some fancy overlay, but when you look at a map of obesity, it also tends to be in many of the same areas. We know that obesity is not a poor person's problem, but oftentimes the same families that are struggling to access enough nutrition are also struggling to access the right nutrition. If your SNAP benefits are running out after 3 weeks of the month and you're trying to stretch your dollars, you're probably making decisions that are, how can I buy enough food to eat, as opposed to how can I buy the healthiest food to eat. So we know that this relationship exists and increasingly is informing a lot of the conversation about SNAP and other programs. So, the Farm Bill. How many, show of hands, are folks fairly familiar, vaguely familiar with the Farm Bill? That's helpful. Okay, so you must have gone to the last. Yeah. So the Farm Bill is a massive piece of legislation that has policy for conservation, rural development, food security in the U.S., food security internationally. Did I say farm programs? It is in the name. I may not have said that. And so it's a very complex bill, reauthorized every 5 years, and is up this year. Decisions will be made about policy at a time when there's this incredible pressure for cuts, which makes it even more challenging to craft this bill. Traditionally, there has been, everybody in the Farm Bill has kind of gotten along. The nutrition programs were brought into the bill in part to make it to touch more people. So it wasn't just about rural members of Congress, it was about those who have urban so it impacted urban constituencies as well when you brought in the nutrition programs. But we saw in the last reauthorization in 2008, conservation groups, taxpayer groups, rural development, nutrition, looked to cut farm programs to increase more spending in some of these other areas that they felt were a better priority for our country's spending. And now nutrition makes up about 3/4 of the total Farm Bill budget. A lot of that has to do, again, with the program being countercyclical. When need grows, the program grows. Also, it has to do with the fact that farm programs are countercyclical. Farm prices have been good, so spending on farm programs has gone down. But still, even if you didn't have those dynamics, nutrition has been a growing part of that bill. So I think some of the challenges that we are going to see in the current Farm Bill are, there was some movement in the last one to ask the question of how can this be a public health bill? Instead of providing farm payments for corn, perhaps we should be providing more payments for fruits and vegetables. And there was a lot of new spending in the last bill on specialty crops. There are programs in the bill that help to support access to farmers markets for low-income people, building community food security programs that connect low-income consumers with farmers in their community. So looking at some of that as part of the food conversation. And I think that there was some movement that people thought that we would address the issue of restricting choice, food choice in the SNAP program in this bill. Given the many, many threats to SNAP, that has not been part of the conversation, which is a good thing. We have our plate full. It's an important conversation to have, but now is probably not the most helpful time. And then also looking at, can you really make progress when everything's being cut? Can you push in a new conversation about public health? That's just incredibly challenging because there's no new resources to spend on new initiatives, A, and B, as we've discussed, this is not a climate for thoughtful policy making. This is just, again, hitting that budget target. So some of those conversations around nutrition will probably be punted to the next Farm Bill, whenever that may be. In the meantime, I think we just saw the Senate pass their Farm Bill in committee, and they did a decent job of protecting the nutrition programs from cuts and minimizing the cut. We would argue in the anti-hunger community that there should be no cuts to SNAP. Given their pressures, they felt like they could not get a bill through without having at least something on the table from the nutrition programs. If remember, this is 3/4 of the Farm Bill spending, it had to give something in their minds. But they also managed to make some small improvements. So there's an incentive pilot that would connect SNAP participants with local farmers markets such that for every $1 that they spend in that farmers market, they get an extra $1 to spend there again, as a way of encouraging them to be purchasing fresh produce. I believe that will also, that the supermarkets may be eligible for that as well, but the focus is on connecting them with fresh fruits and vegetables. So that's part of moving that dialogue forward on nutrition, even in a time of limited resources and in a time when big, thoughtful policy conversations can't happen. There was some additional funding for food banks, which was helpful. Not enough to make up for sort of the drop-off in supply, but a recognition there. But by and large, this has been totally about playing defense. And if you want to work on these programs because you want to solve problems and you want to make progress, it's a very frustrating climate to be working in. But a big part of, if I come home at the end of the day or I talk to my parents on the phone and what are you doing, I always tell them lately I'm preventing badness, which is equally important as promoting goodness in this climate, is holding the line on where we are. I think this sort of the sad fact is that the folks who are pushing for reform and looking to address the deficit have been highly effective in changing the conversation in Washington. But they've now gone to a place that is so far that change is almost not possible because you've pushed beyond, you've forced everyone to recognize that we do need to have this tough conversation about spending, but you've pushed it so far that people are scared to talk about reform, real reform. They're only talking about protecting. And so in some ways it's really a bit of a standoff that we'll likely see through the end of the year. I do think that the pressures for reform will continue into the next Congress, even after If some grand bargain is reached this year, if they do pass a farm bill, there will still be pressures for broader reform on low-income programs, looking at how we're spending, and that's the two realities that we're facing in the next few years, is that need will continue to remain high, and there will continue to be real scrutiny on these programs and how well they're working. So with that, I really look forward to taking your questions.
Thanks very much. Two really great talks and a lot to think about. Let me just, before I forget, thank our co-sponsors for tonight's event, the University Media Office and especially the Harris School of Public Policy. What we'd like to do for the question and answer is to have, if you have a question, to come up to one of the two microphones that are on the side of the room here, because as you may have guessed from the camera, we're recording tonight's events, which we podcast on our website. So we'd like to also hear the questions as well as the answers. So if you could please come to the microphone, be brave, be bold, come on up, and we'll take your questions. You're the fastest, Andrew.
Ha 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 ha. Thank you both for coming to talk. Professor Gundersen, I had a question for you. I'm also an economist. And I noticed that a lot of the things being discussed are very supply side. You know, hunger is sort of being solved through making food more available or changing the price structure. And I'm curious what sort of work is being done on the demand side, looking at preferences and how will people respond to the changes in supply? And if you could elaborate on that.
I guess I would, with respect to supply side, right, I think that shifting the supply curve down is really important so people can afford making food more affordable. I guess I would consider SNAP a demand side thing, is it shifts out the demand curve for individuals so they can purchase more food. So on the demand side, I would think that's the most important, is to make sure that people are able to purchase more food, whether it be through SNAP or whether it be through other means, through other assistance programs, whether it be through supporting Feeding America in their work to make sure that people have enough food, or whether it be through things like the National School Lunch Program, things like that. Am I answering your question correctly?
If you put Walmart in the neighborhood,
right.
We'll buy what we want to buy.
Well, I guess because I'm an economist, I don't think I should be telling people what they should buy and what they shouldn't buy. So I guess I would say is just like when I go into a food store and I make purchases based upon prices and based upon my preferences and based upon other factors, and if I choose to go to a cheaper food store, then I have those advantages. I guess I would say is that's why it's great for persons who are lower income to be able to say, look, I can go to Walmart and I can, to be honest, you can purchase just as healthy a diet as Walmart as you can at Whole Foods, but it's much cheaper though at Walmart. So I guess I would say is that I'd be reluctant to tell people what they should purchase when they go to a Walmart. Whatever works best for them.
Okay, if you don't have another question, then I'll ask one. Go ahead, go on. If you want to.
Can I ask one here?
Can you go to the microphone? Can you go up to the microphone, please? No, over there on the side. Yeah.
I have a series of questions. The first ones are related to children, because when I read about insecurity, I see children in schools who go hungry, and my question is always, if there's a food program, why is this happening? I think my first question is, how do you identify the target population? Are those in need, children and parents as well? In school, if you see a hungry kid, there's definitely a hungry parent someplace. Secondly, how do you ensure that once people are on the program, they don't fall through the cracks? Third, given that the program has a limited lifespan, and yet people are often unemployed for long periods of time, how can you ensure that the people, when the program is, or when they have passed their term limit, they still have access to food. You also mentioned earlier on the link, I think you got very emotional, between the food program and obesity. We know that hunger does not always equal obesity. So what policies are in place to ensure that we do not link the two together? That hungry people are often obese people, or poor people obese. The other question has to do with the food desert. We also know that people who do need this food supplements live in areas where there's no access to fresh food or cheap food, like you said in the presentation. How do we ensure, what policies are in place to make sure that the cheap supermarkets, food stores that are accessible to those with income, with high income, are also in the places where there are food deserts, so there are no good supermarkets and food is not cheap, and access to fresh food is limited. Lastly, you mentioned several programs, several food programs. How many federal food programs are there?
There are 15 federal nutrition programs out of USDA. There's also, I think, 3 senior nutrition programs that are funded through HHS. But this suggests perhaps a greater number of programs than, so breakfast is counted individually, lunch is counted individually, after school snacks in summer, even though it might be the same program person operating them, but there are 15 nutrition. I might take a couple of questions that I remember. So with regard to children, I think, you know, there are gaps, and where there's a hungry child, there may be a hungry family. What we know is that parents tend to protect their children, which is why, as Craig said, it's very rare that you have someone respond that the child went without food for a whole day and their family. So parents generally are cutting back their own food before their children are impacted. But it is a big problem. You have one of the times when children are most impacted is during the summer, because they aren't able to rely on breakfast and lunch that they get during the school year. We also know that kids are showing up hungry on Monday mornings because they've gone the weekend without access to those programs. So in another way that our food banks are trying to fill in gaps where there doesn't exist a weekend program, food banks often partner with their school to send children home with a backpack full of meals. And these are nutritious, kid-friendly, not requiring, you know, a stove and preparation, meals that kids can eat to make sure that they're not going hungry on the weekend. And there's no greater argument or example to argue why it's important to protect SNAP from being a block grant than in looking at that backpack program, because, you know, I remember talking to a school nurse who said, this is a great program. I have more kids here who need this program than it's currently funded. It's not a federally supported entitlement program. She has to make a decision about which kids are going to get to go home with the backpack full of food and which aren't, which is essentially the situation that you would create if you were to block grant SNAP. With regard to food deserts, I think, Craig, you may remember some of the data better than I do. What I recall is that there are families who have to travel a great distance, so it's defined as more than a mile, say, who don't have access to a car, particularly in rural areas. You think about that, and there's also the urban food desert where Detroit is the best example. There's not adequate grocery stores. People are shopping out of a liquor store, a corner store for their groceries. It is an issue, but it's probably oversized in its impact. There are relatively few households who are impacted, who are not able to act. It's one thing if you don't have easy access. It's another thing to not actually get the food, right? So in terms of families, food insecurity increasing because of their lack of access, it's very small. One of the improvements I think that we saw that was a low cost or no cost item in this farm bill is if tightening up the restrictions or some of the requirements on corner stores that are providing or that accept SNAP benefits. So they have to have foods in a variety of major food groups, fruits and vegetables, dairy, I think grains and proteins. So requiring that more of that be fresh is an important way to make sure that these different access points are providing healthy options. But also looking at, in my neighborhood, there's a Safeway that's 3 blocks away, and there's a couple of corner stores that I pass on the way there. because walking 3 blocks compared to 2 blocks is not exactly increasing access barriers to getting food, looking at, well, maybe because we have this wonderful data now about where food deserts are, should all of those places be retailers for SNAP, or should we be trying to drive folks to a larger grocery store where you're going to get a better price point and better variety of food? So I think that would be a better policy way of looking to address food deserts than, maybe you can talk about something. Sorry.
Okay, now so just briefly about food deserts is that it's one of those topics that gets a lot of attention, but it doesn't have much of an influence on food insecurity. I mean, the main groups that are really affected are by American Indians on reservations, so like I mentioned earlier, can be quite far away from food deserts. And persons with disabilities, food insecurity rates are quite high amongst people with disabilities, and it might not be so much that you live in a food desert, but you have access to it. So I'd rather, like Sophie said, concentrate on getting people to food stores rather than encouraging food stores to be built in certain areas. It's very difficult to convince food stores to move into areas. Just like low-income areas don't have banks either. There's lots of things that they don't have. I wanted to comment briefly on 2 of the other things. Just to be clear, is SNAP, somebody can receive SNAP. There's no time limits on SNAP. So it's different than, say, TANF, or it's different than unemployment insurance. People can receive that as long as they want. I also wanted to briefly turn to your question about, I think you're posing a question about food insecurity and obesity being 2 separate issues. So I just wanted to briefly come back to that, is that, as Sophie put up on the screen, is areas with high rates of food insecurity also have high rates of obesity. It's predominantly because areas that are poor also have high rates of obesity, and areas that are poor have high rates of food insecurity. There's really no connection between those two. There's an Institute of Medicine session on this, and they demonstrate there's no connection between them. So in fighting against both food insecurity, some people are interested in obesity, some people are interested in food insecurity. I'm interested in food insecurity. Let's use the programs that we have to address food insecurity, and let's design other programs or whatever you want to do, but don't mess with these programs. I'll give you 2 examples of where they tried to do things like that. Like New York, I just don't understand what goes on there. They have this really neat school breakfast program, but some of the people at the New York Department of Health were concerned that some kids were having breakfast at home and then breakfast at school. So they proposed, well, we got to make sure the kids aren't having 2 breakfasts. I mean, that's crazy. Because some people just become so obsessed with this as, oh, kids might be eating too much. Well, yeah, but there's a lot of kids who don't get a meal at home, so why cut a whole program because of that? So that would be one example. And the other thing is that just in thinking about all these things, I think we have to be really careful that we don't. So obesity is a topic. A couple things about, I'm not going to go too much into this, but obesity rates have flattened out for the last 15 years. They haven't increased at all. We're at a steady state for this. But so I guess I would definitely say again that we shouldn't be messing with programs that alleviate food insecurity. If we want to address obesity, let's use other programs for that.
Yes.
Hi. Yeah. My question comes from Mr. Gundersen's talk, but Ms. Milan, you can also chime in if you want. And it relates to why people don't participate in the SNAP program. I'm thinking back at the time last year where I volunteered at a clinic in the south side of Chicago, and I did a few SNAP applications, and even to myself, who is, someone who knows how to read, someone who goes to college, like the application itself seemed very complicated to me. It seemed very wordy. There was some stuff that I didn't even understand. I was wondering if there was like any push policy-wise to kind of make the application process a lot easier, or to possibly provide translation services for not only Hispanic people that might need SNAP benefits, but also maybe Chinese people, Italian people, like any other benefits that could make SNAP even more available for other participants that might not apply for it just because they don't know how to.
I'll let Sophie take more of the details to respond to this, but I guess I'll say, as I listed up there, there's 3 main reasons why people generally don't participate in SNAP. One of them is stigma, but what you're talking about are transaction costs. If it makes it harder for people to get in the program, they'll be much less likely to participate in the program. And some of the things you talked about are the serious hurdles. And unfortunately, those hurdles is not only that people face hurdles, as you mentioned, these application process can be also during down economic times, is it takes people longer to apply for these and receive benefits. So that's another part of the transaction cost. So in thinking about this, is we have to be very concerned about making sure that it's easily accessible for people to do that. Oftentimes, as we sometimes swing the other way of being so concerned that maybe somebody might get benefits that's not eligible for it, that we make it really, really hard for people to get onto the program, which is part of the reason why the process is so onerous. So in thinking about this is, if we want to encourage participation, let's make the transaction costs lower and make the application process easier.
That's exactly right. I think we've done a state-by-state look at participation rates, the cost to certify each, like per applicant, and error rates, and there's no correlation between spending more on certifying someone's eligibility for the program and having reduced error rates. And it's a program that there is so much stigma and so much worry that someone might be getting $5 extra in food assistance that they don't qualify for, or that someone who is just barely above the poverty line might get food assistance, and how dare they. I mean, there's so much focus on that you do have. It's one of the most complicated programs to apply for. So certainly things that are going to streamline that process and simplify it. What we're seeing happening in Washington right now is, there's been a recognition that the same people who are needing food assistance need housing or utility assistance. They're applying for other benefit programs. So hey, instead of making them go through and check their eligibility 5 different times, maybe we can coordinate some of this, and that frees up states, reduces their administrative costs. Well, one of the nice things is that it also encourages people to participate in the programs. So guess what folks want to cut? They want to make it harder again for, and more complicated in terms of applying for the benefits, because it will reduce participation and then reduce program costs, which is probably not the best policy solution for the long term, but it's a very important factor. The other piece you spoke to in terms of language assistance, I think USDA has to publish the application in a variety of languages. One of the challenges that we found, we do SNAP outreach at our food banks, is that there may not be, in areas like, that have had, say, a Spanish-speaking population for a long time, there are enough folks who are able to assist them with applications. If you have a part of the country that has a newly growing, whether it's a Spanish population or some other language that they're speaking, there may not be anyone at our food bank, for example, that speaks that language fluently enough to be able to assist them. And so that's one of the major barriers in terms of being able to educate people on the ground about their potential eligibility for programs and to be able to assist them with benefits. So relying really heavily on volunteers is one of the ways that is currently an effective strategy there.
I just want to make two more quick points about this. There was a great the care and attention that goes into making sure that food stamp SNAP recipients don't get an extra $5 a month is much more onerous than, for example, to make sure that somebody paying taxes doesn't get $5 more on their taxes or $500 more. I mean, the amount of scrutiny that goes into SNAP is far more than the IRS puts onto tax returns. So that's worth considering in terms of thinking about the error rates. The other thing is, states should be encouraging people to get SNAP. It's free federal dollars. SNAP is a completely federally funded program. So just like communities like to have, say, Army bases nearby or production of other things, is same with SNAP, is that it's federal dollars. State has some administrative dollars. So states actually should be encouraging more and more people to participate to get more federal dollars.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a little more about this whole topic of building public support for these programs. And I mean, it's kind of a truism that entitlement programs that are very broadly applicable are much easier to support politically than programs that people see as only being used by the undeserving poor. And one of the things I'm wondering about is whether you're looking, or someone is looking at messaging around these programs that maybe looks a little more at the kind of language that people would be receptive to for broad public support. And also if someone's been looking at the recipient mix over the last 3 years or so and seeing if that isn't changing, because anecdotally, there does seem to be a change in who's using food pantries. It's not just kind of the traditionally bottom of the income ladder people. And I'm just wondering if that is something that is also true of the food programs, and if that is potentially a way of changing the way people view them.
So I think one of the things that we found was that food banks were seeing a lot of people who had previously been volunteers or donating were having to come to the food bank for assistance. Before you can be eligible for SNAP, you have to not only be income eligible, so you could lose your job and suddenly become income eligible, you also have to be asset eligible. And so you have families who are, part of the reason we're still seeing demand for SNAP is that maybe they weren't eligible for the first couple of years, and so now they finally have run through their assets, which is also a very counterproductive policy of having people to spend down their nest egg or that buffer before they can access food security. And I know the basic ratio of children and seniors within the program has been stable, at least from looking at the last year's numbers. Oh, sorry, your other question about messaging is a very important point. We're working a lot on defensive messaging these days, but I think building that longer term case for the program is important. One of the things that we try to talk about is how, making sure that people have enough food is ensuring that they're going to be able to be more productive in the classroom. They're going to be healthier, and tie into some of those broader kind of goals that we all have for our society, and that we want to have a healthy, educated, and fully functioning society. It's not the most effective. People tend to think about the short term. So conceptually, they get that argument, but it doesn't really resonate with them. And I think that there was some increased public sympathy right at the beginning of the recession. We're in a bit of recession fatigue, right? When people were feeling the strain themselves and they could be more empathetic about needs. Now as this wears on and people are tired of it and they're just ready for the recovery, you see that sort of that empathy waning. And so we're constantly having to change our message to either address misperception or an attack, but I'm not sure that our community has done a really good job of figuring out what that proactive, positive storyline is that resonates with people for the long term.
In terms of messaging, I think Feed America actually had some great commercials where they would have, like, Matt Damon, was it Ben Affleck? Was it, who they would play, there would be actors portraying the difficulties people have been facing as they come into economic downturns. So if those could actually be, turned around, I always think that you always hear some athletes and some, like, for example, Hillary Swank has talked about how much, food stamps really helped out her family when she was younger. If more people can get that message out there, it becomes more and more of a program where, oh yeah, such and such a person received this when they were a child. And I think that would really be, in terms of getting rid of some of these misconceptions about the programs, to make sure that it's more readily acceptable. I wanted to briefly talk about this asset test. Is that about 80% of states, I think roughly, got rid of the asset test recently. But now, as the economic downturn has made an effort to cut spending, is some states have started to say we should reintroduce the asset test. And this could really, getting rid of the asset test was great because it meant a lot more people who were just temporarily income poor but sell the assets could get food stamps more quickly. So I hope that that's one thing that's not changed, is that the states continue still not have their asset test.
Well, and so the official asset limit is, I think, $2,000 per household. It's a little bit higher if you're disabled or senior. But the average SNAP household has assets of $333. So if you can imagine, by the time or people who are enrolled in these programs don't really have that buffer. Yeah.
Over here.
Hi. And Sophie, before I forget, I agree with you. The advertising, the last couple marketing campaigns from Feed America, I thought were awesome. But I wanted to see if we could broaden the conversation a little bit. If I'm off topic, I apologize, but it has to do with sort of getting to the roots of the issue, kind of all this talk about how do we take care of these people that can't afford food. I mean, at the end of the day, we've got more food than we know what to do with. We grow, and I've seen the numbers different depending on who's calculated the numbers, but we grow more food. We grow enough food to feed about 12 billion people in the world. There's 7 billion people right now. So I'm wondering, right, in your expertise as public policy, how can we get to changing public policy from energy policy to trade policy, where we've got fewer people that don't have jobs and don't have enough money to take care of themselves? And the last point on the question is, and Feeding America is sponsors, we've got corporate sponsors that benefit from the status quo. So can Feeding America really work to get to the roots of the issue?
That's a tough question, and we get that one a lot. I think ultimately the solution to hunger is it's resources, right? It can be connecting people with existing food, which is the food bank model, essentially, the recovering food that's would otherwise go to waste, and giving it to folks who need it. But it's also fundamentally people being able to provide for their own needs. I think that's the real solution to hunger. It's mobility, it's access to good jobs, it's wages. In terms of the other piece, in terms, we have more food than we're able to. Craig can probably speak to some of the economic triggers and tugs and pulls better than I can. I think there is certainly a relationship between folks who are donating food and who get a PR value from that. I'm not sure that there are also folks who are up on Capitol Hill helping us out and advocating for programs like SNAP. I don't think that relationship stands in the way of at least hunger policy as we work on it. But I can't speak to the big macro conversation. I'm going to punt to Craig.
Well, I guess I don't know how to respond to so many things, but I think I might take a slightly different. I think Walmart's part of the solution rather than part of the problem. I mean, I really, and so therefore, I'm thankful that ConAgra Foundation supports Feeding America. I'm thankful that Walmart Foundation is a supporter of Feeding America. I mean, they don't have to be, but they're concerned. Their leadership is concerned about hunger in the United States, and so I really don't see. I see them as part of the solution. As I mentioned earlier, is getting people safe, affordable food is a good thing, and Whole Foods isn't doing that. Walmart is doing that. In other words, so I know you weren't demonizing Walmart, but I guess I see them as part of the solution rather than part of the problem.
And I'm not demonizing Feeding America. Like, I've got friends that work there, and they're great people. I'm just, right, like when I talk about like trade liberalization or energy policy that subsidizes using fossil fuels as opposed to human labor, right, to grow more food, more nutritious food per acre than the industrial agriculture model, and then trade liberalization like where NAFTA hurts small farmers for the benefit of more empty calories that some of the multinational corporations benefit from getting artificially cheap.
I'm going to have to slightly disagree with you. I mean, commercial. I work for National Soybean Research Laboratory, so I mean, clearly I work closest with corn and bean farmers in Illinois. But efficient agriculture is important. I mean, we don't expect people to. We don't want small-scale manufacture of computers or of cars. We don't want that. We don't want that. So agriculture is the same. I mean, so there's a reason why if we wanted to go to small-scale agriculture, we can no longer feed the world. We feed the world because we're very successful at building this. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So go on to the next question.
Okay, we'll do one here and then we'll go.
So, Sophie, you mentioned that a lot of your job right now is just kind of holding the line against budget cuts to the SNAP program. And I'm curious about what appeals you're making to legislators who may be seriously more concerned with balancing the budget than hunger. And it kind of goes towards the public opinion question earlier, but a little bit more specifically to kind of how are you lobbying the government around this specific issue?
I think it's constantly having to remind people that when you talk about $4 billion or $20 billion or $130 billion, what that means in terms of the number of people who are going to lose benefits, and then painting it. So the Senate passed a farm bill out of committee that had about $4.5 billion in cuts to SNAP. So that means 500,000 families will see a reduction in their benefits. They're going to see a reduction of about $90 a month. These are families that tend to be disproportionately senior and disabled. So let me paint you a picture of a client. What we're really trying to do is get client stories from our food banks and the folks they're serving to really show how the impact is. We also, I think a big part of our lobbying strategy has been to get members of Congress out to their food bank to see, because people don't see, hunger's not visible, and to get them to be able to talk with a client and hear about the choices that they're making, to hear about why they're food insecure or why they're needing this assistance in the first place. So that one of the challenges about public policy is that there's a real reluctance to embrace the complexity of any issue that you're working on. And for poverty is an incredibly complex issue. And it's easy to demonize people as the undeserving poor, or they're not working hard enough, or this program is bloated and there's lots of waste and fraud. And that's a very simple solution to the problem, but the solution is not that simple. And so anything that you can do to translate what is just a number on a piece of paper into a real person and real consequences, it's about the best that we can do in this situation.
And just from a program evaluation, I mean, we should emphasize that this program works really, really well at what it's designed to do. I mean, presumably, Congressperson should like a program that works well, and it works extraordinarily well.
What you were kind of building off of that question, and then what you were talking about at the end of your presentation with how as funding is being cut, it's hard to make progress, even though there is still need for progress. And then also from the first presentation where you talked about one of the areas where there's improvement needed is in financial decisions. So since there's not more funding, what kind of groups do you think need to come up to fill those gaps to create more progress? Is it improvement in the financial decision making? Is it education in that realm? And what kind of groups are going to, do you think, need to be working on those types of policies?
We have a partnership with Bank of America. They work out of our food banks to give financial literacy. I mean, that's a small scale. You're not reaching everyone who needs to be reached, but that's a really important part of the solution. And if we could build that up from the private sector, that would be incredibly valuable. Certainly, I remember having some class in school about how to balance a checkbook. Hopefully they've updated their curriculum. I don't think anybody uses checkbooks anymore, but I think we could certainly do a lot better job of building that into the education. Ultimately what you need to do is protect, we're playing defense right now, but it's important to play offense. And there is a real conversation to be had about how programs could operate more efficiently and effectively. They are highly efficient. I think the administrative costs in SNAP are less than 5%, and a lot of that is going to, providing core services for participants in terms of employment and training. It's making sure that retailers aren't trafficking. It's not just pushing paper around. That said, it's a $80 billion a year program, so even a small change in efficiency will yield real dollars. So ultimately what you need to do is to change the debate, right? So that it's not a debate that's just happening focused on cuts, but it's talking about outcomes, and it's how do you shift the dialogue so that you can have that safe conversation? Because ultimately the SNAP is the biggest anti-hunger program, and so we can't rely on just making progress around the edges or a little, charitable public-private partnership here and there. Real solutions need to come through a program that has real reach, like this program does. And so the sooner that we can shift that debate to being more constructive, then we can talk about more fundamental, impactful solutions.
Okay, so I think we have 2 more questions here. Okay, there's 3 more. So these are our last 3 questions.
Hi, thanks for coming. My question is on education. I teach high school at a public school on the south side here, and about 85% of our kids are on free and reduced lunch. And the access to good food is very prevalent at our school. We have healthy lunches, cook in healthy oils. There's access to a vegetable every day and a salad bar, and you have a choice of an apple or an orange or a banana. But when I go through the line, I don't see that added supply is translating into increased consumption for our students. So I still see a lot of after lunch hunger, kids didn't eat because they don't like the healthy choices. So I was wondering what maybe is in the future for educational policy to, they know that it's good for them but they don't want it type of idea, and what maybe is going to come about maybe in the Farm Bill or other things to change that in America?
I mean, the issue you raise is Los Angeles School District also, they implemented a program where they wanted everybody to have healthier choices. And they found the exact same thing that you did. The kids wouldn't eat it. I mean, around the world, is if you give people food that they don't like, no matter how hungry they're not going to eat it. So I think we have to be really careful in setting up these programs. I mean, these programs have been around a long time. Kids seem to enjoy what they're eating in those meals. So we have to trade off if we start giving healthier choices. But I mean, even in our own lives, we don't always eat. I have a choice every day what kind of healthy food I'm going to eat, but more often than not, it's not healthy. So why do we expect kids to all of a sudden start choosing these things when they without going hungry? So I think we have to be really, really careful with these programs and moving in different directions. Let's not forget about that hunger is a real issue and in considering changes to these programs.
I think, though, you can still, we should aspire to, particularly for low-income kids who are maybe getting the bulk of their calories at school, that they're getting good, nutritious calories. But it reveals the complexity in eating, that it's about taste. It's about, you can't, just putting food in front of someone doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to eat it. So in terms of improving nutrition, it's making sure, always 3 pillars, right? You have the resources, you have the access, and you have the education. And so I think a big component of it in terms of behavior change, whether you're an adult who needs to rethink about the choices that you're making or how to make your dollars last, or a child in terms of what they're used to eating and what they're being introduced, it's behavior change, which you can't, it's not just about providing it, it has to be more complicated than that. I think there's some good research that shows that I don't think that community gardens are a solution to hunger, but they have been very effective in terms of making people aware about the food that they're eating, and people who are involved in growing their food are more conscious about the choices that they're making, those kinds of things. So I think further exploration needs to be happening there. But what is Jamie Oliver's School Food Revolution? I mean, not a scientific sort of research, but in terms of going up when kids are at home and their parents are feeding them, finish your plate, you can't have dessert until you clear your plate, that sort of thing. And in a school cafeteria setting, that's probably not happening. So I think real conversations need to take place about what is going to move the needle on that issue.
I just had a few suggestions, like first to see, maybe not using the word entitlement when referring to like programs like this, making the link card not have link written across the front of it, making it look more like a debit card. And now my question, I'm of a bit of a different opinion in regards to how well the SNAP program is working, only because my observations are from the ground. And I was just wondering, are there any on-the-ground measures in place to actually see how these programs are being implemented in the communities that are most affected by food insecurity? Because I know that there's like any tendency when you don't have assets in one area, you can find a way to convert those assets into what you need. And I'm just wondering, is there any actual measure of the assets that are being given being actually turned into food or nutrition for these kids, or is it just based on the numbers of I give you this much money per month, this should cure your food insecurity to this level? And just also in response to the previous person in regards to healthy food and nutrition for kids, I think it's an issue of familiarity. If you don't have early familiarity with certain foods, it's kind of a moot point going forward. I also think that just because I also work in a school on the South Side, just on a volunteer basis, and a lot of the kids don't really care about health or nutrition or anything because their immediate needs aren't being met. So it's like they don't think about the future. The future is tomorrow. So it's like, how do you really teach them health and nutrition when you can't project a future where it will be important? So that's just one thing that I'm just throwing out from my observations of being at the school. So you can answer my question.
To your first point about the like SNAP and it getting to, you mean maybe people are selling their benefits. And
I know that people are selling their benefits.
So I think people make decisions about where resources are needed. One of the beauties of the SNAP program is that it allows people to provide for their food budget and thereby freeing up other resources that they can use to pay for utilities or rent or what have you. So much of the federal aid that goes to families is very prescriptive or is not adequately funded. And so by freeing up those resources to enable them to make the choices that they need to make is very important. You know, I heard a story of a guy who was using his SNAP benefits to buy hot dogs and hot dog buns, and then he was a vendor. If that's going to be, I think that's entrepreneurial spirit, and if that's going to yield him more income than just buying his food, I don't personally have a problem with that. There are stories about people trafficking. It's one thing, I suppose, if you're not eligible for the program and you're trafficking. If you're eligible for the program and you would be better spent in some other capacity, I mean, it's from a public policy perspective, that's a very hard thing to address. People are adults and have to make those decisions, and when so much of our aid is either very prescriptive or requires so much in terms of applications to be able to access it, and when it's not supported with things like financial literacy, because, well, okay, I'll give you food, but financial literacy is a luxury, or that, I mean, I think it's a really systemic, broader issue, but I would point out that I think the program has, because of its record of, or this myth around fraud and abuse, has done a lot to increase efforts to reduce trafficking, both by retailers and by participants. But it is an ongoing issue in the program that is worthy of being addressed, both in terms of accountability in the program, but also in, are we really serving people in the way that they need to be served?
Is there any research in that area that's sort of, is there any on-the-ground research as to how these programs are being actually implemented? Or is it just like statistical, is there any interest in doing research in those areas?
There have been. I mean, I first want to come back. I mean, your earlier point about entitlement really is an important one, because we use it as a technical term about entitlement, for that it will expand whenever it needs to. But your sort of entitlement that people are entitled to this may give people the wrong impression. So that's an important point. There has been some research done by USDA into the extent of fraud within the program. And so they constantly monitor it. I do want to distinguish between two types of fraud. If a retailer, for example, is giving people 50 cents on the dollar when they trade in SNAP benefits, I think that's a problem, because then the retailer's getting it. But like Sophie said, in other cases, I'm not quite as concerned. Suppose that, because usually it goes for about 50 cents on the dollar, is if somebody sells their SNAP benefits to somebody else, maybe that other family actually did need more food that month, so they're getting more food at a discounted rate, and maybe the person selling it maybe needed money to pay their utility bill. And so it's not ideal, but given the constraints people face, maybe it's not quite as, I guess I would say, trafficking between people is not as bad as trafficking by retailers, I guess I would say.
I mean, I understand. I don't have problems with people doing what they feel they need to do for their families. My concern is that people are hungry because maybe they need to do things for their families. They need to pay rent, keep utilities on, but they're also selling the money that they would be purchasing food with, and there are still hungry children that are not able to function in school. That's more so my concern, is if there is any research in regards to this money actually going to the children or to the families that actually need it. Because if you have a big, huge resource gap in another area, you're not going to take your only asset and put it towards what you're supposed to put it towards. You're going to try to spread it out. And so that's what I'm concerned with, the research in that area, how much spreading is occurring.
I think there is a need for more research on outcomes, right? Are we accomplishing what we mean to accomplish, and not just measuring, you know, how many people are participating or how many, and so that is something that is generally not funded as easily, so it would be important.
I will say this, though, is that we have Jim Ziliak, who's at University of Kentucky Center for Poverty Research, and myself, we received funding from Food and Nutrition Service, $5 million worth of grants to give it to different groups across the country to do research on the determinants of very low food security amongst children, which I defined earlier. And a lot of this work is looking into coping strategies. using both qualitative and quantitative work. So hopefully we'll get at some of these questions, what does a family, why do some families, why are they food secure versus other families, and how are they managing their limited resources? I think hopefully that research will point to the questions you're asking.
Thank you.
So, last question.
Hi. Thank you both for coming tonight, and thanks to CIS for the forum. I'm not quite sure how to phrase my quandary into a single question, so bear with me. I see three facets. The first you've touched on, and that's a certain disconnect in Congress in terms of this program and how it works and where to go with it. The second, that map that Professor Gundersen provided earlier, shows general areas that are largely served by these programs, especially SNAP, also show a great deal of disenfranchisement on the part of the population. Simple fact is that access to the system declines dramatically as you fall farther down the food chain and the socioeconomic situation that we have. So the third part is at least two congressmen that I can think of off the top of my head from Illinois that represent large sections of those areas you showed on your map seem to have no shortage of time to grab headlines for completely unrelated things. And yet I wonder if they even have a clue about how these programs serve their constituencies. So I think my question gets to advocacy and how we can really focus on the people that can best do that for this program in Congress, starting with congressmen whose I lost the word there. Constituents are largely being served by these programs, getting on the bandwagon and speaking on behalf of them.
I mean, advocacy is where it's at. That's what we spend. I am talking to folks who work on the Hill, but a big part of what we do is mobilizing people into advocacy. So whether that's our food banks and the agencies and their volunteers or their donors, their board members, it's incredibly powerful. I don't know if folks remember when there was going to be a change to sort of online privacy and Facebook and all these different, Wikipedia I think did a campaign, they shut down. Boom, Congress responded. I mean, you can get Congress to respond, but you also have to get people to engage. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with a problem that is largely invisible, that's misunderstood, that can be quite technical and complex, it is a challenge in terms of mobilizing people to advocacy. And so it's an important part of the work that we do, and that we continue to do. The maps, for example, that resulted from the Map the Meal Gap project have been really effective to that, to be able to simplify something, a complex issue, and not only to simplify it, but to personalize it. Oh, okay, I don't know those counties or those neighborhoods any better than Craig does, but where I live, I can look and say, oh yeah, Montgomery County, we know that people tend to be poor there, and so of course more people are going to be eligible for SNAP. But boy, I did not know that in this county that there was such hunger, and not only that, but they're not eligible for, so personalizing and helping the people understand, I think that education is the first part in terms of advocacy, but I would encourage all of you to advocate on these issues or whatever issues that you're passionate about, because it truly does shift. You need a critical mass, but it does influence the decisions that are made.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, is this program is an easy sell. I think it does a fantastic job at what it's designed to do. But so I'm pleased that we have some excellent advocates at Feeding America and elsewhere that can help bolster this program.
Please join me in thanking both of our speakers.
The World Beyond the Headlines lecture series is a project of the University of Chicago Center for International Studies. Our nationally recognized programming is made possible with support from the Norman Waite Harris Memorial Fund. Download recordings of other events and learn more about the World Beyond the Headlines series at the Center for International Studies website, cis.uchicago.edu.